Caledonian Elixir. From Glasgow, Scotland, welcome to the Caledonian Elixir. I'm your host, Vincent, and we are on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and Twitter X. And also, you can get us as a podcast on Spotify. And don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and follow button. So, we've got an awesome show for you today. But before I get to that, I want to say it's good to be back from that holiday hiatus, and I hope you're all well and had a good holiday and Christmas. So, we've got some big changes happening here at the Elixir. We've got a new studio under construction, and you'll probably notice that the background is different. So, we're actually building two new studios. And if you could drop in the chats and the comments if you think the background tonight is an improvement on the previous one, just let me know. The last couple of episodes before New Year featured several guests specialising in international affairs. However, as this show covers everything from politics to the paranormal, we're going in a different direction today. And in a minute, we'll be bringing on a special guest. She is a former MUFON director of Colorado, an investigator, researcher of the phenomenon of high strangeness on legendary American ranchlands. If you don't know what that is, think of Skinwalker Ranch as an example. She also investigates UFOs, cryptids, and it's an honour to have her on. So, without further ado, Katie Paige.
Hi, Vincent. Thank you so much for having me on. I like the background. I like the pyramid. And hello, everybody out there. And I hope to wish everybody a Happy New Year.
You know, I was just thinking there as I was introducing you. Usually, when I've got a guest on, I say, without further ado, Katie Paige or whoever the person's name is. One time before I introduced them, I said, alas, forgetting that I had that negative, connotation to it. So at least I got it right this time. So it's good to have you on. And again, I've said this before when I spoke to you last time. I love that ambience you've got in the background with the fireplace. It gives it a comfortable, pleasant feel.
It's nice. It's one of those remote control. You can turn it on, turn it off. You need a little extra heat. So yeah, it's just a nice warm vibe.
So you
and
could
in
be
the Rocky
talking to
Mountains,
me.
it helps.
You could be talking to me and adjusting the background at the same time.
Yeah.
That
This is a real background.
That itself seems paranormal. Well, I recently saw your channel and I said to myself, I had to get you on as a guest because I loved your insight and your style of presentation. So can you describe in a general way your background? For example, why are you so interested in these unusual ranchlands?
Yeah, so as a young girl, my mother started dating a gentleman actually in the 70s. She was a computer operator for United Airlines and worked in the Denver Tech Center, divorced my father, and started dating a gentleman that owned a 60-acre ranch out here in Elbert County, Colorado. And for 3 years, my family and I experienced a lot of high strangeness activity, from the paranormal to the cryptids to UFOs. And I'm 9, 10, 11 years old at the time. This is the late 70s. And we were kind of told not to talk about what was happening out there. I didn't know anybody knew anything about the ranch property. This is where, do you know who Linda Moulton Howe is? She's an investigator.
Yes.
Yeah. So Linda Moulton Howe, she was an investigative journalist out here in Colorado at the time and really started her career out there at the ranch property of my childhood investigating all these high strangeness cattle mutilations, not just cattle, but horse and other animals as well. And so
Mhm.
for, like many of us do, you go through life, go to college, raise a family. And I just always question, like, what was that? So my big thing was how much of this was military access programs, how much of this was actual paranormal high strangeness activity. And I, like so many people do, I got interested in all these kind of fringe topics, and I started watching television shows and documentaries and things like that. And I learned of MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, joined, went in as a field investigator, started just learning about the topic. And then one afternoon, I picked up this book right here called Hunt for the Skinwalker, and it's on the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, and read the back, and I was like, wow, that sounds like my childhood. And in this book, in the chapter Other Hotspots, they talk about the Colorado Ranch. And in the APRO, which is the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization that investigated the ranch, they didn't know the actual location. So it's been an unfolding of, getting the documents, learning what the investigators found, really researching not only the ranch property of my childhood, but the whole area, very similar to the Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin. Out here in Colorado in Elbert County, we have the Palmer Divide that's very similar. So it's just been a journey ever since of just, really researching all these different activities that were experienced on the ranch from my childhood.
Right. So you grew up at Rocky Mountain Ranch. What experiences did you have at the ranch that shaped your worldview or just an interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, so much. And like, I just want your listeners to be really clear. I did not live on the ranch full time. My mom's boyfriend had 3 sons, and the 2 younger sons lived with us. We lived about 45 minutes away, and we'd drive back and forth to the ranch or go there on the weekends so they can visit their mother and things like that. Every time we were at the ranch, we would experience some things. So for 3 years of my life, when I'm 9, 10, 11 years old, we're hearing about police being called, animal mutilations being done, but specific things that my sister and I experienced, just unusual anomalies, humming sounds. One day we were out, in Colorado here, we get wet, heavy snow in the springtime, but the sun will be shining, it'll be a blue sky. And we were out flipping the frisbee in front of the ranch house, and we looked down, and there was this large 75-foot in diameter circle that was just dry dirt.
Mm.
And it just stuck in our minds as very unusual. And now on the History Channel's Beyond Skinwalker, they have called that the landing spot, because when Beyond Skinwalker is launching rockets and things like that, all sorts of weird things are happening right over that same area. And it's actually documented in the APRO files, which was really cool. The scariest night on the ranch, though, is we were there celebrating the boy's mother's birthday. All the adults were hanging out, playing board games. Me, my sister, and the 3 boys were back in the ranch house bedroom. And this hum sound would start up. And so
Mm.
that happened. And then all the power in the house goes out. And there was a bright, bright light out the window, which was terrifying. And at that moment, this like disembodied electrical sounding voice came through every orifice of the house. And what's really interesting about that, both my sister, my mom, and I, my mom passed this last year, but we all remember that very clearly. It was a very terrifying night on the ranch. And John Schuessler, who's one of the founding fathers of MUFON, knew of my connection to the ranch. So he bestowed upon me the original briefing document from back in the day, which I think, if you go online, you can actually find this online, and you can read the report in a PDF. But in this report, it had the exact quote of that disembodied electrical voice, which basically said, "Attention, we have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us." That was terrifying. Now, I don't know if that was ET or if that was Black Access Military Projects, because I did uncover something called plasma ball technology, which actually pipes like electrical sounding voices out into the field of battle, right, to protect, you know, um, actually men in the battlefield. So were
Mm.
they experimenting with things like that on the ranch property? It's possible, but there were other, activities of, the adults seeing um, orbs of light, landed craft, extraterrestrials. I never saw this, but in the reports, the adults did, and several adults saw these things, along with the cryptids and the creatures as well, and
Did you
helicopters.
sorry,
So a
interrupting.
lot.
Did you experience any symptoms that accompanied the humming sound, the electrical humming sound? You know, you get, like, for example, animal acoustic deterrent sounds that have an ultrasound frequency and can induce like dizziness and nausea in some people. Did you experience anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that night I just described to you with that disembodied electrical sounding voice, and this was reported in the report with other adults as well. But my mom, my sister, and I, we get in the car, we drive back home, and I went into the house, and I fell to the ground when I walked into the door, and I kind of went paralyzed for a minute or two. I couldn't speak. My words were all jumbled, and then I started getting the tunnel vision, full blown migraine headache. So I suffered migraine headaches, dizziness, and these were ongoing. And they were really intense, with the nausea, the vomiting, things like that. So much so, at that same time, I was put into this program, which is a whole other interesting story. It's the Twilight Learners Biofeedback program. These are still my original
Yeah, I
tapes.
would like to get into that a little later.
Yeah, to get rid of the migraine headaches, but I think there was more to that program than meets the eye.
You know, some people listening to this may be thinking, UFOs and UAPs are like physical scientific technology, but it's got nothing to do with accounts akin to medieval apparitions or orbs or high strangeness location. But a lot of these high strangeness locations, as you described it, are like the trifecta, aren't they, of the paranormal? Um, you experience a lot more than UFOs or, their more modern acronym UAPs. What do you think's the cause of these manifestations or this paranormal activity? Because over here in Britain or in Scotland, we've got a term for it. It's a thin spot where something bleeds into our universe or our world that comes from another. So what do you think is the source or the cause of it?
Yeah, Vincent, that's a really good way to describe it, a thin spot, and that's something I looked at early on, like, there's these locations around the globe that seem to be thin, like, the veil is thin where we're able to maybe interact with the phenomenon more, and it's also interesting that certain individuals seem to be able to interact more than others. So, like, it affected my sister and I quite differently, and I'm like, "Why is that? What is that all about?" And some of the things that I have discovered in looking at the Skinwalker Ranch and Bradshaw Ranch and in the Sedona, Arizona area with the Brett, that's where the Bradshaw Ranch and Marley Woods in Missouri and certain other areas. Um, they really, if you look at the geological magnetic maps, when you go to locations that are highly, highly magnetic, and all these locations are Skinwalker Ranch, Rocky Mountain Ranch, ping the charts of being highly magnetic. Then you throw into the mix water, so rivers, streams, lakes, even aquifers. So right where the Rocky Mountain Ranch sits, we have two of the biggest aquifers in the state of Colorado, the Denver and the Dawson. So the water tables are a little different under the earth, but that opens up water, opens up natural caverns and tunnels and things like that.
Mm.
So we have high magnetic, we have water, and then a lot of these areas, just like if you're into the paranormal and ghosts, where the Stanley Hotel is in Estes Park, we have, and with Palmer Divide, we have certain rocks and minerals. So we have limestone, granite, things like, the crystals. So I feel like it's a combination of the earth itself, and then people, it seems to me that people that are open to these types of phenomenon have another element to it, which is a manifestation or an openness to it, or they've had certain traumas that have caused them to disassociate from their physical bodies, whether it's a near-death experience, a traumatic situation, or meditation, that kind of opens you up to be able to see through that thin veil.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard, I don't know if you're familiar with the character, you probably are, David Paulides, and he documents a lot of cases, a lot of locations that experience high strangeness, and of course, along with that, missing persons cases where they disappear. and you have a lot of locations where you've got water near, and granite near. It's like, so I find that very interesting. But you highlighted how there is almost a biocentric or psychological different, perspective there, like in the sense of how you experienced it and your sister. It was different. Like, can you expand on that? What was the differences in terms of experience between you and your sister?
Yeah, I love my sister very much. She's really I think, and even with Greg that lives on the ranch to this day, I feel like the more grounded into the material world you are, and it's also a willing. Like my sister is like, I don't want the hitchhiker. So there's a term called the hitchhiker phenomena that really kind of they started talking about it here in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and for pretty much all of my life, I'm compartmentalized and put in different baskets. Like this was the paranormal and ghosts because I have seen shadow figures and a lot of paranormal things throughout my whole life. These are UFOs, these are cryptids, but I do think they all intersect and overlap each
Sorry,
other.
sorry. You've seen shadow figures. Can you explain what that is? What is a
Yeah,
shadow
when I
figure?
was young, so when I was having these experiences at the Rocky Mountain Ranch and I would go home, I didn't know to call it hitchhiker phenomena at the time, but I always slept with Big Sister because I'd see these tall, they were very tall, 5.5, 6 feet tall, dark shadow figures inside my doorway, next to my bed, at the foot of the bed. They would typically come in twos. One time I saw 3 of them in the room, and I was terrified. I'm 10 years old. I just hide under the covers and not move, those kind of things. So that was frequent. I would hear footsteps, lights going on and off, things like that. Your typical haunted
Mhm.
house. I did not connect it at the time to the ranch, and maybe it was connected and maybe it wasn't. But I definitely experienced these things. So at age 11, my sister actually moves to Wyoming. She graduated high school and moved out of the house, and that left just my mom and I and the boyfriend. Eventually, those two separated, and he went, went his separate ways. But
Mhm.
yeah, so a lot of these things interact, and I really feel like it's a willingness to be open to the phenomena. Or, I had a lot of trauma in my early days, 2 house fires, and,
Mhm.
a very violent alcoholic father and a half brother who ended up in the state hospital for arson and things like that. So I think trauma played a role in the way we responded to it. So I would often, as a little girl, would kind of leave my body and try to go somewhere that was nice and not so scary.
Mhm.
And maybe that connected me into other realms. I don't know, but it's also, I've been open to exploring these topics, and other people might not be so much. Just a good example is Greg, who likes working on cars and building, and he's just hands on, really not paying attention to the things that might be going on around him. Since Beyond Skinwalker, and since we've talked a lot about these phenomenon, he's starting to recognize and have experiences of his own, which is really interesting.
Do you differentiate the apparitions, manifestations that you experienced as a little girl differently as opposed to you do today? For example, when you were younger, 10 or 11, and you were experiencing these shadow beings or seeing orbs, whatever it is you were experiencing, did you did you think it was just all one thing? And now you look at it differently. Now you can differentiate between the different aspects of the phenomena and go, well, this is not a cryptid. This is, say, a manifestation of my own psyche, or this is something maybe related to UFOs. Like, did you differentiate it when you were a young girl, or did you just think it was one thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. My memories of that. I mean, when I was a young girl, 1977, we had Close Encounters of the Third Kind came
Mm,
out in the theaters, and Star Wars actually came out in 1977 as well. I remember thinking like that's a documentary because there were animal mutilations and I was experiencing that in my real life. I did not connect the shadow beings or any of the paranormal things at the house to UFOs at all. I really
mhm,
wasn't thinking in terms of UFOs. I mean, the hum, the circle on the ground, the disembodied voice. I never saw a UFO. I never saw an alien. I never had those experiences, so I didn't make that connection. It
mhm,
wasn't until decades later, as I'm researching all, these connections to these different phenomenon, that I'm like, maybe they were connected, maybe they weren't. I don't know. I can
Yeah.
tell you this, though, when it comes to the paranormal and the shadow beings and that, they're quite different than like a typical paranormal or ghost experience, because I have had that as well, where it's like when my dad, for example, lost his third wife, I moved into his house for a while, and I think her name was Midge. I think Midge was haunting that house. There's a difference between like a human haunting and whatever this was back, in the ranch years. They were definitely different, because they came in like 2s and 3s. They were taller, they were darker, they were more foreboding and scary, where your typical just, human ghost is not always like scary like that. And I have learned to reframe it in my own brain as an adult. Like back when I was a kid, I was terrified of it.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, well, I'm not sure what that was.
I've got two things to say on that. The fact that a lot of it is localized does give the impression of something like a haunted land. Maybe not a haunted house, but a haunted land. And then, as I highlighted earlier, you've got the psychological or like the biological, a biocentric angle there to look at, and that we could be manifesting it. I know as a kid myself, I have migraine, and so I've got neurological problems myself. And when I was a kid, I used to experience terrible migraine. Usually, it was triggered by my environment. For example, every Sunday when I would come back from chapel, I would experience a terrible migraine. I don't know if it was incense, but it was diabolical. Pardon, the pun. But
Yeah, it can be like the lights, like like the fluorescent lighting or certain smells. Because my children also have suffered. Some of them have suffered pretty bad migraines as well. And I remember middle school, the girls are wearing certain perfumes, and it would just trigger these awful migraines for
yeah.
Tyler. So yeah.
But I also, when I was a kid, I had my walls painted by my uncle. My uncle was an artist, and he painted a lot of these characters, like the characters in the Ghostbusters animated series. And when I was a kid, like in the middle of the night, I would wake up and I would see the head of the characters, the Ghostbusters characters, come out of the wall
Oh
and come
wow.
towards me. And it looked like they were coming out of the wall. And that freaked the hell out of me.
Yeah.
I remember I used to run into my mum's room and say, the painting, the characters in the wall are coming out, but I believe that this really was due to the fact that I had migraine, and I
Yeah.
was, I was diagnosed with migraine much later, but I don't think the people in my family, my circle, really knew what was causing it at that point in
Yeah.
my life. But again, it is interesting, like how your psyche, or like your physiology can be a center of it, can in a sense manifest it. But I would just like to play a short clip, and it's germane to what we're talking about. It's Congressman Luna, and it's when she was on the Joe Rogan show.
I can also tell you, and this might sound crazy, but based on our investigations and stuff that we've seen, okay, there is definitely something that I think would rival what we know currently with physics, and a tech that potentially is out there that we don't have the ability to reproduce, because it would basically be like dropping a cell phone right off back during the time of maybe caveman. So like we just don't have the tech to develop it yet. What I can also tell you is based on our interviews, and this has been something that you can go back and watch with the congressional hearings, but I was actually able to ask some of the witnesses, what are these things? And they keep saying interdimensional. And then when you talk about the interdimensional aspect of, are these things pre-existing, maybe outside of what we currently know as our own dimension? That stuff can kind of all sound crazy, but at the end of the day, my job as an investigator is to receive all the information, decipher it, and then ultimately from a congressional aspect, if you...
That is Congresswoman Luna, and she was saying out loud, on a huge podcast, in a public forum, some of the findings of the recent Congressional committee, such on UAPs, such as the House Oversight Task Force, and she's saying outside a lot of stuff that was only said in, in files like in the Condon Report and Blue Book to mainly government officials. Yet, despite the increased transparency and the public nature of these findings now in these committees, the phenomenon, at least to me, it still feels shrouded in a sort of veil of imagination as opposed to physical reality. There's something about it that just doesn't seem quite real to me yet. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, that's something for 15 plus years I've really been trying to reconcile and try to understand the difference. MUFON inherently has always been a nuts and bolts organization. We really focus on structured craft and sightings, and I'm a researcher. I love archives and documents and video footage and photographs of things that are tangible that we can understand. And that's really important. All of that is really important. But then you start talking to experiencers, people who have experienced all sorts of different things. And that's where it starts getting into the more hitchhiker, high strangeness, portal, dimensional, really makes you question what reality is in general. So that's where it gets really kind of mystical, magical, and harder for people that are really grounded in physical reality to grasp onto when you don't have those tangible things to go, okay, we're not looking at a nuts and bolts craft. So yes, I think it's a slow process. And I really feel though in the last few years, we're taking big strides, being able to talk publicly about these more, not concrete experiences of people and trying to understand what that is and how that works in the brain. Are we manifesting it ourselves? Are we, able to go to these places where the veil is thin? I don't know the answers, but I think that people, and even looking at, these nonverbal autistic children and talking about psionics and remote viewing and other skills like this, we're starting to understand a little bit more that there might be more to this reality than meets the eye. And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, there is plenty of documented evidence that there are psychic abilities like remote viewing. We just need to go to, the Congressional Church Committee, and we can uncover for ourselves what organizations, agencies such as the CIA have been doing to us and experimenting with
Oh, yeah.
that. And then you've got like Operation Stargate, etc. But you were again highlighting, high strangeness locations and how that can interact with our biology, with our psyche. And I have spoken to you about this before, about a high strangeness location that is close to where I am. And I would like to share that with you again and the audience who may not be familiar. It's a place called the Bridge of Death, otherwise known as the Overton Bridge. It's at the Overton estate, which was previously a burn or a ravine. And the land was essentially purchased in the mid 19th century by the Baron of Overton, a man called James White, who incidentally was an alchemist. And the construction of the bridge, it was finished around the 1890s, providing better access to the Overton house, the Overton estate for the the public. Now, this is when it gets interesting because it's known as the Bridge of Death because over 300 dogs have jumped off it and dozens to their death. And moreover, there have been human tragedies on the bridge, infanticide, such as when James Moy, whom after visiting the bridge with his 1-year-old child, believed that his child was Satan and then threw his his child off the bridge and then attempted to kill himself. However, it's the sheer number of animal and, to be specific, dog-related deaths that really caught the imagination. But there's a lot more to it. But if I could just play a clip of myself at Overton to share with you what it's like at the site. And that is the Overton house. As you can see, it's some elaborate stonework. And if you turn it towards me, this is the bridge. You see the parapets, 3-4 foot high. Get a shot below. Try and get a shot of the wall. The bridge isn't too long. It's quite a rustic area out in the middle of nowhere, as you can see. And you'd be surprised the number of people who we have seen walking their dogs along. You could just get a shot. So to go a bit closer again. So that is me at Overton. And it is an impressive location, quite secluded and scenic. But again, it was interesting to me, the number of people I saw walking their dog on that bridge. You would have expected them to be a little, a bit more wary about that. But yeah,
It's a beautiful location, and what a tragic story with the baby. And what you said kind of perked up my ears a little bit. You mentioned the occult and occult practices, and something that came to my attention, which was quite interesting. We had the History Channel Beyond Skinwalker film crew there for season 1 at the Rocky Mountain Ranch, and I was getting to know Greg and his wife Chris, who unfortunately passed away after the filming of season 1, and his daughter Nicole. And they had lived in that house there on the ranch, and still do, Greg does, for over 30 years, and they didn't know the full history of the property. And so we're getting to know each other. We're sharing photos. I'm sharing the documents and the research I've done. And he had mentioned he had all these old photographs of the house when they purchased it, and they purchased it directly from the family of my mom's boyfriend. And what they found out in the back of the ranch house in this wooded area, very similar to the footage you just showed me, it seems like pretty similar terrain, which is interesting as well. But they found evidence of occult practices there, on carvings on trees and stickers and things like that. So it begs a question: do practicing, alchemy and some occult practices open up doorways where the veil is thin? So you already have a location on Earth that's already thin because of the elements we talked about: magnetism, geological, water, and obviously there at that bridge there's water as well. And then you put in the occult. Does that open up something that's causing these tragedies or these dogs to jump off? And there's another location that was featured here on Beyond Skinwalker, in Trinidad, Colorado, and it's Sue and Tom Miller. And I've been out to interview them recently. I interviewed them on my Rocky Mountain Ranch Research podcast, and we were talking about, with these animal mutilations, is it the land, is it the people, is it both? But there's a mysterious bridge there as well. And I know they researched that on the series, but it's very unusual. And actually, the very first time we went out to that property to interview Tom and Sally, we accidentally took a right-hand turn and kind of went behind where this bridge is into these treed areas, and we physically, you mentioned physical effects, we got really dizzy, disoriented, headaches, like both of us immediately, Tony and I. And we went over to the bridge, and the magnetism there's many car accidents there. People, there's birds that will just fly into your vehicle there. It's a mysterious bridge. You get these almost out of body feelings there. So there's something about that. And I don't know if the occult has something to do with it, but yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Well, the geology, I believe, definitely does play a part. And it's interesting when you alluded to the carvings that were there, and they are carvings on the Overton Bridge of the
Oh,
cadices, like the snakes round the rod. And I was thinking to myself, that's quite interesting. Like, why would you have that on a bridge, on
yeah.
almost a 200-year-old bridge? What's
Are,
the meaning behind that?
are there other
Um,
bridges similar to that in the area? And do they have the same type
no,
of activity with the dogs?
no, that's
Mm.
I mean, there is a druidic pass to that location, but in terms of the backdrop of mass animal suicides, murder, infanticide, ghost sightings, that's the only high strangeness location that has ticks all those boxes. And again, there is the local culture there that often interprets much of it um, within the paradigm of our own experience. So they may see an orb or a strange apparition and they'll fit it into the local folklore of the area, such as the the White Lady of Overton. I think she was the wife to the Baron, and she was called Grace Campbell. And so a lot of the locals in the area think that the sightings of the orbs are actually more, it's her spirit, it's her ghost that's illuminating the area, and she's trying to call the life towards her. Like, she wants the animals and the people to, for some reason, to move on to the
Mhm.
life. Again, that's folklore, that's kind of local stuff. But it is interesting because, again, as I was saying earlier, some people listen to us may think that all of this is, when we're talking about UFOs and UAPs, it's physical scientific technology, but a lot of these apparitions and sightings of glowing orbs and even experiencing, physiological, psychological effects, they're all mashed in together.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not differentiated. But there's another thing that I found interesting on your channel, and it's your description of your childhood when you were getting treatment for migraine. Uh, was a specific doctor? Was it Thomas Pedinsky?
Thomas Badinsky. Yeah, that was a whole interesting turn of events because, like I said, I still have the tape, so you can see on here. Let's see, where does it say it? Right there, Thomas H. Badinsky. And I was put in this program while we were spending time at the ranch for my migraine headaches. Not thinking much about it, I went. This office was in the Denver Tech Center in Colorado, very close to where my mother worked. She was
Mhm.
approached actually at work, and somebody told her, you need to put Katie in this program. And what I learned about Thomas H. Badinsky, how this came about, I have a podcast that I do live every Wednesday night called The Trifecta, where UFOs, paranormal, and cryptids collide. So I bring in guests and we talk about these topics. And one of my guests started talking about the Gateway Project or the Gateway tapes. So, I searched on YouTube and I started, I put on the headphones and started to do the Gateway process tapes just for relaxation and just kind of chill. And I think it was the third one in. They started doing, your body is heavy and warm. They kind of go through this deep relaxation program with you, and it's exactly what's on these tapes. And I'm like, oh, I know this. So it kind of started this investigation into Thomas H. Badinsky. What I found out was, and there's a video you can find from the late 70s that actually talks about all of this. But Thomas H. Badinsky was actually an engineer out of Area 51. He was a navigational engineer for the SR-71 Blackbird navigation systems. And all of a sudden, he decides to start this biofeedback program. And what's really fascinating, even in this little movie you can find on Google, there's a little boy in that movie named Kevin who was in the same program I was. They hook up things to your fingertips to kind of test, your temperature of your hands. They
Mm.
monitor your head for relaxation, and their goal is to keep you in a theta state. So that kind of twilight state where right before you fall asleep, where you can lucid dream and things like that. It's a deep relaxed state, kind of like what they like you in the theta state for hypnosis. But I found out in this tape, they're asking Kevin, can you make the rocket go? Can you make the rocket land? And it made me wonder if he's a navigational engineer at Area 51, were they back engineering craft and they couldn't figure out how they were navigating these craft? Was it mind to craft connected? And I think that's true. I also come to find out that Thomas H. Badinsky worked with the Monroe Institute, the Gateway program, the Stargate program, and there was another. It's another institute that they worked with. So they were looking into psi abilities back in the late 70s that this was going on. And I was a part of that program. And that's another, Vincent, you mentioned the differences between my sister and I. Could it be because I was in this program for a year that I really learned at 11 years old how to stay in that theta state? It opened me up to experience these more because she was not put in that program. So was that the difference? I don't know. I can go under hypnosis pretty easy, and I can get to that state pretty easily thanks to that training. And it
Sorry,
migraines.
sorry. See, the Gateway program, was that an international program?
I think it was this kind of tight program between certain PhDs, with the Monroe Institute and certain. I certainly have come to believe through my research and knowing who was kind of on the ranch that there was for sure, thanks to documents, that we did have a military presence out there with the Air Force. We know NORAD was aware of the ranch property. So I do think there was some MK Ultra mind control kind of things going on there, thanks to some testimony that I acquired through certain individuals. There was a document in the archives that stated that there was a soldier, his first name was redacted out. No, his last name was redacted out. Warren redaction, went to the ranch, felt something take over his mind, made him walk towards the woods, would release him, and he'd run back to the ranch house. And this did this to him 5 times. That's in the report. And my first question was, why is there a soldier there from Camp Carson or Fort Carson? So that's really interesting. Police officers had the same experiences out there. There's another whole element to this that took me years to talk about, these mysterious boxes. And I was actually talking to Paul Sinclair. Do you know Paul Sinclair out there in the UK? And he did some box encounter reports too. And I'm like, wow, this is a global phenomenon. It's just not in the United States. So there were these strange, mysterious boxes seen out there as well.
Right. I want to, before I get to the boxes, because I wanted to talk to you about the boxes. The Gateway program asked, is that an international program? I asked that because I was speaking to my friend last night, and he told me me and him were both in that program as children. So that's why I'm asking, is that an international program? I don't have any memory of it myself, but do you know if it is an international program?
I can imagine that it probably would be. And it's interesting, the little bit I've researched into this, and it's something that I want to try to research more and maybe do some FOIA requests for some, if I can get some, documents on this too, it would be fabulous. But there were like two groups, or like in schools, elementary schools. I think certain individuals were targeted in elementary school, whether you were in the gifted programs. So, testing really high. I was not in that group. I was in the group of ADHD, learning disabilities, trauma, divorced parent, that whole thing. So I was on the other end of that, and I was being pulled out of class all the time, and I didn't understand why. I'm like, I thought it was for like speech impediments, and I'm like, but I don't remember having a speech impediment. So it was a very interesting time in my life. So if you have memories, Vincent, of being pulled out of class or things like that, we all remember the like hearing tests and things like that. Raise your hand if you hear the tone. It was that, but almost every week. And so a lot of people that have been put into these programs remember that. So yeah, I think they were working on kids on psi, studying psi abilities, for decades, going on 50 plus years now.
Yeah. I mean, another reason I'm interested in your background, your childhood, in terms of, with Padinsky, is just because, not only because I suffer from migraine myself, but programs such as MK Ultra as you know, had a lot of sub-projects that undertook experiments often on kids at institutes. You could think of Creedmoor. But for around a century, when you look at the timeline, you can see the development of a science involving mutually working on altered states of consciousness on the one hand, and on the other, unconsensual experimentation on the public, and very often children. So, like, 100 years ago, Freud was working on the strobonic injector, a technology to impress suggestions on the subconscious. And a little later, you got George H. Estabrook's experimenting on Japanese prisoners of war using hypnosis to create Manchurian candidates. And then you get Edward Bernery, MK Artichoke, MK Ultra, etc. And nowadays you've got the technology of smartphone offering algorithmic mind control there. And I'm kind of going on a rant, but do you think as a child you were experimented on by Padinsky within the matrix of a sort of CIA sub-project?
Absolutely. And I also think it's a reason why we won't see disclosure anytime soon. There's a lot of liabilities. There's thousands of people that were put into these programs unwittingly. They didn't know, especially in state hospitals. And that could be a connection on how our family got tied into this. I am not sure. But at that time, right around that same area, right before my mother meets this gentleman, my brother had burnt down our house. He took gasoline, torched the house. Well, the week before, he took an axe to everything in the house. So I can remember coming home from elementary school, in the first grade, and seeing an axe in the wall, and he had chopped up the organ and the furniture, and he'd break light bulbs. It was very traumatic. And so after my brother torched the house, he ends up in the state hospital in Pueblo, which is, the town. We have Colorado Springs that we have NORAD and the Air Force Academy, and it's very heavily militarized. Pueblo is where the state hospital is. And we know that even, the late 50s into the 60s, into the 70s, they were doing a lot of programs on people that were institutionalized in these state hospitals. And certainly my half brother might have been part of that. And I don't know if that's where the connection then, because then it connected to the elementary school. Let's pull Katie out and put her into these trauma groups, for the divorce and the fire and these kind of things. And then the testing, and then this Padinsky program. So I think somehow it's all kind of interweaved. But if you're talking that this is a global program and they are experimenting on or studying, I think studying is a better word, children, there's a lot of liability issues right there.
Sorry, isn't MK a designation for a global program? So when you've got the designations MK Artichoke, MK Ultra, isn't the prefix MK a designation for global?
Could be. Yeah. And I know two years ago, we went to, right after Contact in the Desert, which is a big UFO conference here in the United States in California. And after that conference, we had an interview with a family who it was a widow and a daughter of somebody that owned the Dulce, a lot of land in the Dulce base area, so in New Mexico, Colorado border. And her father was a high up CIA guy. And you could tell the mother was still a little reluctant holding secrets, but she was telling us about a program called FM. So with these military soldiers and in these programs, these Black Axis programs, they were experimenting with soldiers, active soldiers, with what they called FM, freaking magic. And it was a combination of LSD and other drugs for mind control. And so I thought that was interesting. And these people were doing that on the ranch at Rocky Mountain Ranch. And it begs the question, why? And so when I read these documents, and I have photographs of, ETs that were seen supposedly by the adults on the ranch, like this guy, Paul Giamatti named him the Tubi guy. Were these, MK Ultra hallucinations? Were these actually, these guys were reported being seen by a lot of people. Also, this picture here, this guy here was seen on Rocky Mountain. This guy here was seen on Rocky Mountain Ranch. This guy here was a gentleman I met years later, and he said these tubes in the neck actually come out kind of like this guy, but they're very similar. This person lived 14 miles away from the ranch, and we didn't know each other. So, were they hallucinating the same kind of ET, or were they actually seeing an ET? I don't know. I never saw these guys, but these are the guys that were reported out there. And then there were also reports of the blonde, blue-eyed Nordics. And what's written in the APRO reports from back in the day is that these two types of ETs were in conflict with one another. The blonde, blue-eyed Nordics and these Tubi guys were in conflict, and don't mind us and we won't bother you. So that's what was reported. I think it's really, really interesting, because there's been other accounts like Travis Walton and others that have different types of ETs or beings that they were encountering. Sometimes it's the Greys and the Nordic. Sometimes, you hear this all the time. So
Yeah, and I think in the 70s, I think it was the 70s, maybe it was the 60s. I think it was Sub-Project 119, and it was a microchip, which was a form of technology anyway to create thoughts, to induce thoughts. And this was in the 60s and 70s. So, if that's what they were working on, and it was an admission they were working on this technology. And this, as I said, was over 55 years ago. It begs to, what have they got now? But there's a clip here I would just like to play, and again, it's quite germane to what we're talking about, in terms of experimentation on people.
I'm Christy Nicola, born July of 1962, rendering me 32 years of age. I was a subject in radiation as well as mind control and drug experiments performed by a man I knew as Dr. Green. My parents were divorced around 1966, and Donald Richard Ebner, my natural father, was involved with Dr. Green in the experiments. I was a subject from 1966 to 1976. Dr. Green performed radiation experiments on me in 1970, focusing on my neck, throat, and chest, 1972 focusing on my chest and my uterus in 1975. Each time I became dizzy, nauseous, and threw up. All these experiments were performed on me in conjunction with mind control techniques and drugs in Tucson, Arizona. Dr. Green was using me mostly as a mind control subject.
Wow, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, that was the Committee for Human Radiation Experiments in the 90s, and Valerie Wolf and other psychiatrists were present there, given their experience working with patients who were victims of this. And you can find a lot of footage online on YouTube regarding that. And again, it's prolific. The number of people who have stated that this has occurred to them in one form or another. So before we wrap this up, would you like to describe this phenomenon of the boxes? Because I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, the boxes is so high strangeness that I didn't even want to talk about it for years. I'm like, what are these boxes? But it's something that was reported at the ranch. I had a box encounter in the daytime. It was my mom's boyfriend and their youngest son. It was daytime. We stopped at this little outbuilding, which was also interesting because when I went to visit the ranch for the first time on Beyond Skinwalker, that building wasn't there. And I was like, I remember this specifically. Thank goodness Greg got all the pictures, because he's like, are you talking about this building that we took down? And I'm like, yes, it's like a little shed. So we stopped at this shed, got some tools or something, got in the back of the pickup truck, and we started driving behind the ranch house in Overton County. So Overton County is pretty rural. There's a lot of flat land, but there's also ponderosa pines, so forested and flat together. And behind the ranch house is a big forest of ponderosa pines. So we're driving behind in the pickup truck. He stops the truck. I don't know why he stopped the truck. Maybe it was the hum sound or bee sound. We heard it. He jumps out of the truck. I look back at the trees back there, and off the ground is this box. And it's making this sound. It had like lights on the inside. And all I remember is Jack yelling at us, "Get in the truck. It's the box. It's a box. Get in the truck." We jump in the back of the truck. I look back and that box was gone. Now, there's reports reports, the APRA reports of Bill Waugh, the undersheriff at the time. He was out on patrol near the ranch area. He knows the area very well. It's very rural, especially in the late 70s. And he sees this box, and he did not want to approach the box. So he goes and gets a posse sheriff. They come back. They watch the box and what he thought was the trees like go into the ground. So he witnessed the box, and there were numerous people in the reports, if you read them, that have these encounters with these box. And in one of the documents claimed that these ETs, these guys, were saying these boxes are lethal, and they claim to have demonstrated this by having a Sasquatch approach the box and the Sasquatch drop to its knees. I mean, crazy stuff. So like, what are these boxes? Are these military related? Are these
How large was the box?
the one that I witnessed was, 18 to 20 inches this way and maybe 12 inches this way, very rectangular. But what's interesting about the boxes, Carl Higdon, you mentioned David Pilates, who's a friend of mine. He talked about the aquifers in a famous Carl Higdon case in 1974, around the same time in Medicine Bow, Wyoming, where he's out elk hunting, has the bullet that stops and drops and is turned inside out. There's a lot of physical evidence in this case. It's a really good case. It's a Carl Higdon case. People can look that one up. But there was a box there, but it was described much bigger. There was a box out with Trey Hudson at the South Skinwalker Ranch. They caught a box type anomaly on the FLIR cameras. There's other box encounters that are in the archive. So once I started realizing that these boxes are seen, globally, even Paul Sinclair talked about a box encounter. I'm like, okay, there's something with these boxes. I had a woman come up to me after a conference, and, in interviewing ranchers that are having, animal mutilations, one of the ranchers stated that in the pastures where the mutilations are occurring, the animals, the cows are very calm and huddled together. And in the adjoining pastures, they're all freaked out. And these boxes are sometimes seen along with animal mutilations. Are they a tone or frequency that kind of calms the animal, calms the people, maybe, hypnotizes them? I don't know. But it's
Sorry, didn't you say that you heard a humming emanating from the box?
Yeah, there was a hum, and it changed tones. So if you've ever like stood under power lines like that, like a bee, like it sounded like that, and then it shifted tones.
Did it sound like an ultrasonic frequency?
Sort of, yeah. Yes.
Because there are a lot of boxes that, well, they're not, geometrically perfect cubes, but a lot of cubicle-shaped objects that emit ultrasonic noise, and usually they're on government buildings now, and they make you feel very, uncomfortable. Put it that way. You're a bit dizzy. Your ears going because it's there to deter you from being in that area. And I know I'm just wondering to myself, do you think that it could be emitting an ultrasonic frequency?
Yeah, I think they were experimenting with things not only there, but at Mount Wilson Ranch as well. We had that Mount Wilson Ranch, which is, Bob Bigelow owned Skinwalker Ranch and Mount Wilson Ranch at the same time. And that Mount Wilson Ranch has a Howard Hughes connection that is mind-blowing and incredible. I think they were experimenting with all types of things, and certainly maybe the boxes was government experiments. I'm always looking for these more grounded, logical explanations. I don't always like jumping to aliens and UFOs and things like that. So absolutely. And what's really crazy is that first night back on the ranch for season 1 of Beyond Skinwalker, we got an unexpected, we knew it was going to snow, but the snow came in hard and fast. And I was walking the crew. Actually, you don't know it when you watch the episode because they don't talk about the boxes on the episode, but I was walking them back to where I had this box encounter. And that's when, it's coming down hard, and it's this blanket of snow, and then out of nowhere are these bipedal large tracks that go for a little while, then they disappear, and then they come back up and walk and then disappear again. There's nobody out there. This is in the Ponderosa Pines. So they caught that on the episode, and I'm glad they did. It was as if something came up underground, was curious as to why we're there with a film crew, walked, went under, came up, walked, and went under again. It was very, very strange. But that same night, the next day, we had off of filming, and me and my daughter went to Red Robin to have a hamburger and, doing a little shopping so I can buy hats and gloves and things like that to be better prepared. And my shoulder started hurting, and on my back shoulder, and you can see this on behind the scenes. I think it's part 1 on my Rocky Mountain Ranch Research YouTube channel. I got like a radiation burn, and it looks like almost a handprint on my shoulder. It was hot to the touch. It blistered. I told the producer right away, like, this happened to me last night. I was wearing several layers of clothes because it was cold. I had a vest and a sweater and a thing. I didn't lean against anything. I have no idea what that was that got my shoulder like that, but it was like a radiation burn.
Right. Yeah, I saw that on your channel.
Yeah.
You were
So
saying
that's pretty scary. And every time I've been back, there's been something. Like at the landing site, I was trying to tough it out. I was really excited for these experiments we were going to do. And one thing that they don't share on that episode is Hillary, the sound lady, had just put brand new batteries in all of our microphones. And so I'm standing there getting ready, to do these experiments with the team. And I just went pale. Blood pressure went way up. It felt like 10,000 knives coming down on my shoulder. And at that moment, my battery went from 100 to 50. Everybody else's stayed at 100. What I found out too, my sister was experiencing similar symptoms, but she doesn't say anything. So, Andy walks me back to the barn. And by the time I get back to the barn, my battery was completely drained. So what is that about? And why did it target me individually? I do not know. But every time I've gone back to the ranch, things like that happen. One time we went back and I just wanted to kind of, redo some of the things they did on the episode. We put the drone up in the air right over the landing site, and it was fully charged. The drone just within a minute was dead. We plugged it in, it charged back up. We flew it again, and it was fine. So it seems to be transient. It'll like affect something 1 minute and not affect it the next. It's very trickster.
You don't think someone's playing a prank, like targeting you with an EMP?
What's that?
Do you think someone could be targeting you with an EMP? Like an EMP would drain the battery in a drone?
Yeah, I certainly hope not. I know there's been other people that have reached out to me with that very concern, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around, like, why would they do that? I just don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I really truly don't. And I also have the people out there that get concerned, like, oh, it's something negative or evil or bad. And I certainly don't feel that way. I feel very almost protected and blessed, and a lot of really good things happen. And I always go in with really good intentions and things like that. And something that I kind of giggle to myself about with the burn on my shoulder, when we were walking back there and, the snow's coming down hard, I'm just wearing my blue jeans. There's a barbed wire fence. And I went to step over the barbed wire fence and I fell forward. I like tripped over it and fell into the snow this way. And I'm wondering if that handprint was just somebody trying to help me up. Did somebody or something just go, oh, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I really don't.
There was another thing that, and I said that would be the last question. However, when I was speaking to you last week, when I was corresponding with you last week, you mentioned Snippy the horse. And as you mentioned Snippy the horse, I happened to be reading Jacques Vallée's Passport to Magonia, and the specific case of Snippy the horse just was on the page I was reading while I was essentially looking at your email. So I was a synchronicity, a coincidence, a high strangeness coincidence. But anyway, so would you like to tell us what the background of Snippy the horse is all about?
The Snippy the horse case, and not to invite myself back on, but we could do a whole nother episode just on the Snippy the horse case. But this was a a case. It was really the first global, before viral was a viral. This is the new book cover here for it. Here, Snippy the Horse, UFO Mutilations and Cover-Ups that started it all. So this is our test copy of the hardcover. It's available on Amazon. But Snippy the Horse was really the first global recognized animal mutilation back in 1967 in the San Luis Valley. And the King family, so Nellie King owned the horse. And we got to meet thanks to their big Snippy event that they have every year out in the San Luis Valley. And in the 80s, the name changed from a 3-year-old male gelding to a mare named Lady. Lady is Snippy's mother. So it was this whole mystery of like, what's true? What's the true information? And because the UFO Historical Record Center just acquired all the original APRO files from back in 1967, the data was available to us for the first time after 35 years, 30 plus years. So I drove to New Mexico, went to the archives, and got to see original photographs that have not been seen in over 30 years that verified, yes, this was a 3-year-old male gelding. But the most surprising thing about reopening the Snippy case and doing this book for the King family, Tony Angiola and I, is that there's way more to the San Luis Valley and the Snippy the Horse case than just the first recognized animal mutilation of a horse. It involved another box encounter, many UFOs, many orbs, things flying in and out of Mont Blanca, possible military CIA connections out there in the valley. And this predates Snippy. This goes back to 65, 66 and earlier. The Mount Blanca is a very sacred mountain where even the Native Americans will not battle or fight there. It's very sacred ground. So, the hum sounds, all these connections, the cryptids. There's so much to this case that on a daily basis, my mind was like, oh my gosh, another connection to Elbert County, which is, about 3 hours away. I couldn't believe all the things that were reported in 1967 in the San Luis Valley that matched the Rocky Mountain Ranch. So what is that? I don't know.
Yeah. I saw some of the images that you sent me. With the horse's flesh torn off, and it was very brutal, very brutal and tragic. Let's wrap this thing up. And is there anything you would like to tell the audience about? Anything you'd like to promote before we end this?
Yeah, I would like to promote Rocky Mountain Ranch Research on YouTube. If you could check that out and give me a like and a follow. I accidentally deleted my channel, maybe 7 months ago, and it was devastating. So any love and support there is helpful to me. And you can check out Katie Paige, and that's paige.net. If you're interested or you have questions or comments or want to reach out, you can contact me there, as well as RockyMountainRanchResearch.org. So those are both ways you can get a hold of me. And of course, check out the Snippy the Horse book.
Okay, Katie, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Vincent, for having me.
Good afternoon, I guess, where you are.
Yeah, good afternoon, and good evening to you.
Good night for me.
Good night.
Okay, goodbye. That was Katie Paige, and I enjoyed that. That was a good conversation. I learned quite a bit. And I recommend you checking out her channel. And if you enjoyed, you can, don't forget to put a like, subscribe, or you can click the donation link at Buy Me a Coffee, or just go to Caledonian Elixir/Buy Me a Coffee. We've got another episode, I believe, this Wednesday, and it's featuring a debate on what's happening right now between Trump and Greenland and Venezuela. And that's featuring a political analyst and, a couple of political analysts just debating it out. And then we've got on Thursday, I believe, Hake from the Hake Report, also the producer of the Jesse Lee Peterson show. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, I will catch you later.
Gold-pressed platinum, slip strips and bars. If you ever find some, you can lose it in quads. box. Get a Ractogino, spin the double wheel. Order a black hole, just depends how you feel. Yeah, it just depends how you feel. Go press platinum, you know it's a gas. Mon vomits it up into a tiny little glass. Liquid platinum, more you